What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. I hope you guys are staying safe and doing well since the last time I posted. Now, today's video is a little different. Instead of looking at a case from beginning to end, we're just going to look at the very end of that case, and we're going to look at the last 24 hours in the life of Ted Bundy on death row. Now, I'll tell you why I ended up doing this video today as opposed to maybe a different topic or a full case. I ended up rewatching that Zac Efron Ted Bundy movie, and as far as serial killer movies go, that's one of my more favorite ones as far as people portraying actual serial killers. That's probably at the top of my list. So that movie is the reason I'm doing this video today. So if any of you were curious as to why I'm doing this video, that's the reason why. So without any further ado, let's get into this video, shall we? Now, Ted Bundy was executed on January 24th, 1989 at Florida State Prison at about 7 in the morning. And one thing for some reason I had forgotten about was Ted Bundy had 3 death sentences going into today. He had 2 stemming from the Chi Omega sorority house murders, and he had another one stemming from the Kimberly Leach killing when he took Kimberly Leach from the middle school that she was attending. Now, before we get to the morning of the execution, we gotta travel back in time to the day before and January 23rd. Bundy wakes up at about 6 a.m. that morning. He's sitting there with a lukewarm cup of coffee, and he's probably also sitting there with breakfast. Now, I can't imagine he ate much because he didn't eat any of his last meal later that day. So he's probably sitting there just drinking his coffee, trying to think of anything of last second that he can do to avoid the death penalty. So 8 a.m. rolls around after he had his coffee and his breakfast. He meets with his lawyers for the last time, and they're all lodging appeals. At 8, 9 a.m., they're lodging appeals to the state, they're lodging appeals to the federal government, and they're all of these appeals they're lodging all centered around his mental competency. They're all saying, hey, Bundy is not mentally competent to be executed, so he shouldn't be executed. But I look at that and say, hey, look, Bundy was deemed competent enough to be able to be his own co-counsel in a death penalty case. How can you say he's not competent to be executed? Although I understand why they did that, because they're death penalty lawyers. They're trying to get their client to not be executed. Like I've said before, I try not to blame lawyers for the things that they do because they're trying to defend their client with what they have at their disposal. Now, 9 a.m. rolls around, and that's his last meeting with his lawyers. And from what I read, apparently Polly Nelson, which was one of his 2 lawyers, got really emotional at the end of their meeting. And apparently she actually hugged Ted Bundy and walked out of there crying, which is wild to me because I know, and you guys all know, if Bundy would have seen her on the street somewhere and she was by herself, she could have very well have been a Bundy victim. But I can understand it from the perspective of you're working to save someone's life and you failed, and you're getting emotional on the fact that you couldn't save this person's life that you were trying to save. So from that perspective, I understand it, but I also don't understand it, if you know what I mean. So about noon is when he gets his final no. His final, you're getting executed in the morning, comes down from the Supreme Court at about noon. But Bundy's got one more potential trick up his sleeve, for lack of a better term, and that's the Dobson interview, and it's a long shot. But Bundy thinks going into this interview that if he can manipulate Dobson expertly, because this is Bundy's last deceit, that maybe he can get Dobson to intervene on his behalf to state and federal authorities, saying, hey, you need to keep this guy alive for X, Y, and Z reason. But I won't talk much more about that interview because I got a lot of things to say about that interview, and a lot of things to say about Dr. Dobson, and that's best suited for its own interview. So that interview takes place around 2:30 or so, and the rest of that afternoon is spent bargaining time. He's bargaining with state and federal authorities, saying, hey, I'll give you locations of victims' bodies. I can help you solve other cases. I mean, he had already attempted, air quotes, to help in the Green River murder case up in Seattle. So he maybe mentioned that. He's trying to do anything that he can in order to avoid execution, but none of it's working. Bundy's supposed charm, what people talk about, isn't working, although I don't think he's that charming. He didn't even charm the women that he killed into getting into his car and going back to his house. He would use ruses like a broken arm. Maybe he would just break into their house like he did with the Kyle Mega house. He didn't have that charm that people attribute to him because he wasn't a super ugly guy. And because he wasn't super ugly, they instantly think that he's this charming guy, but he wasn't charming. That wasn't his MO. He was scared. He wouldn't attack a woman if she was with a guy because he was scared of men. He wouldn't have been confrontational towards them. He wouldn't have been confrontational towards a group of women. The only reason that he probably broke into the Kyle Mega house that night is because he figured it was late at night, early in the morning. They were all sleeping, so he could go from person to person attacking them and not have to worry about a rather large group of people that he was trying to attack. You know what I mean? So that's why I'm not a big believer in the Bundy's charismatic, because that was never his MO. So 6 o'clock or so rolls around, and Bundy's offered his last meal, which is like steak, eggs, typical like breakfast type meal. But he doesn't eat it at all, because at this point he knows he's got no shot at avoiding the death penalty in the morning. He has to answer for his crimes that he has committed. And he's getting emotional, he's crying, but he's trying to maintain his composure, because he's like, I'm Ted Bundy, and this is the same Ted Bundy that once said, I'm the most cold-hearted SOB you're ever going to meet. But now he's sniveling and crying because he's going to be executed and held accountable for his actions in the morning. So fast forward another couple hours to about 1 a.m. when one of the prison ministers arrives to meet with Ted Bundy in like his last moments. Now, credit to this minister, he spends the entire morning with Bundy from 1 a.m. when he gets to the prison up until the time Bundy gets executed. I mean, the guy even sits in the chamber with the viewing audience at his execution to see Bundy get executed. I mean, I wouldn't have done it myself. You might call this man a better man than me, but I know if I was a religious man, I couldn't see myself going to talk to a death row inmate. Maybe that's just me. I don't know. But we don't know exactly what they talked about, but we know that, he asked Bundy about his, his childhood in the church and his church memories. He asked Bundy if he had been saved and believed in God, and Bundy had claimed that he had. I mean, we know that about 3 a.m., he placed his last phone calls. He called his mother, and then he called Carol Boone, who at this point was his ex-wife, and she refused to talk to him, so he called his mother again. But we know from that account of the preacher, basically as that morning and as the night went on, he got more and more emotional. He was crying, but he had some sense of, I don't want to call it peace, but some ease about him, because he was with someone that wasn't a prison official, that wasn't going to be executing him. He was with someone that was there to comfort him in his final moments, which I don't personally believe a guy like Ted Bundy deserves. You can call me, an angry, mean sort of guy for that. That's just my opinion. A guy like Ted Bundy doesn't deserve to be comforted in his last moments. He gave up that right when he started slaughtering and killing innocent women and children. Maybe that's just my opinion. Maybe some of you guys will agree with me there. So about 6 a.m. rolls around, about an hour before his execution. He gets up out of his cell. He showers for the last time. He changes his clothes for the last time. And then they shave his head to prep his head for the thing that they're going to put on his head for the electrocution, the cap, because they need to shave his head to ensure a good connection. And then at about 6:30, he's led into the execution chamber. They read out the death warrant to him, and then they ask him if he has any final words. And instead of apologizing to the victims' families that might be in the audience, apologizing to the victims themselves, instead of doing any of that, he just turns to one of his lawyers and the minister that had been there all night comforting him and tells them to give his love to his friends and family. Then they flip the switch, and about 2 minutes or so, Ted Bundy's dead. And he's pronounced dead at about 7/16, give or take a few minutes, is when Ted Bundy is pronounced dead. Now, there are photos that claim to be of Bundy's body post-execution. I don't know if those are the real things. Some of you may have seen those photos as well. I don't know if those are the real thing or if they're from some other movie or something that was about Ted Bundy. But there are photos out there that are purporting to be the actual photos of Ted Bundy post-execution. But I just don't know how real and believable those are, you know what I mean? And that's the end of Ted Bundy. According to his will, he is cremated, and ashes are spread in the Cascade Mountains, which a lot of people were upset about because the Cascade Mountains were connected to a lot of his victims. He dumped victims there. He placed bodies there. Some people thought he shouldn't have been allowed to scatter his remains there, but his remains were scattered somewhere within the Cascade Mountain. Everything on his prison thing was donated to the prison. I mean, his money was donated to the prison. His books were donated to the prison library. To my understanding, all of his possessions that he had left from his money, which was almost $800 on his books, to all of that other stuff, to my knowledge, was all donated to the prison. And that's the end of Ted Bundy. The murderous, necrophile, pedophile has finally been put down, in my opinion, like he deserves. Let me know in the comments below what you guys think of this. Do you want to see me talk about more death penalties, more 24 hours at the end of someone's life like this? Let me know what other videos you want to see me do in the future. I already know what the next video is going to be, so that video will be out fairly quickly after this one. I don't know how quickly, because, you know, I wish I could do this full time. Eventually, hopefully I will. But I still got a job right now, so I gotta pick and choose when I get to do these. But let me know in the comments below if you like this video. Like the video, it helps me out a lot. Subscribe to the channel. And until next time, guys, be awesome and stay safe.